Hi, my name is Richard Spinney and welcome to the Ghetto Gourmet, 5-star dining on a food stamp budget. Today we're going to be starting off our Know Your Equipment series where we go over your selection, care, and maintenance of kitchen equipment. And we're going to be starting off with what's probably the most important piece of equipment you're going to be going with, your 8-inch chef's knife. Let's get started. Alright, so here we have two examples of a classic German chef's knife. The distinguishing feature of a German chef knife is this big prominent rocker on the front end. On a Japanese blade, this is normally straight the whole way through, and you'll see it curving more on the back end. And on a French blade, it still curves in the front, but it's a much gentler curve, much less prominent. I've given two examples here today because these are the two different knives that I have. This is a good old Walmart special. Costs about $20, and this is what I use at home. And this is a $300 Henkel, 300 and change actually. And this is what I use in the kitchen. Now, the big difference is between these two is the handle itself, the hilt here. So this one is a full tang that goes the full length of the blade, and that's that metal part that's in the center there, that's the tang. And that's riveted in, and this is a polymer handle. So this is slip resistant and sweat resistant. So when I'm in the kitchen and it's 120 degrees and I'm cutting 50 pounds of potatoes, I'm not going to be losing my grip while I'm doing that. This one, on the other hand, is a solid piece of steel the whole way through. The handle is solid steel. There's no real grip on this, but for home use, you're not going to be in a particularly hot environment. It's not going to be as high stress. So as long as you're careful, this is more than enough for you to be able to work with safely at home. Now the next part is how to actually hold the blade. So this is important. A lot of people, for some reason, they like to grab the blade all the way down on the hilt like this. Now, it seems like this is how it should be held, but this is very bad because you're losing a lot of control over your knife the further out that is. So it's very important to be gripping up. You should really just be using your forefinger and your thumb to hold that knife. Your other three fingers are just there for guide to make sure that it stays in place. And the other part is with the left hand, what you're holding your food with that you're going to be cutting. A lot of times you'll see chefs doing this, or on the YouTube channels anyways, and Food Network and all that. And if I can get a good view of this without actually cutting myself. When you're doing it this way, for one, your fingers are all extended, and that's inviting a knife. Two, you have nothing to actually guide your knife with, so if you catch something and slip, that's going to be going right into your finger, and you're going to be losing a nice tip of it there. Conversely, if you go ahead like this, like, what's it, those Japanese Neko girls they call them or something like that, a little cat paw, pull your fingers in, fingertips right down to the base. You're keeping your actual fingernails right against the cutting board, and you're using the flat part of your first two knuckles as a guide for your knife. Your knife is going to be right up on top of that. And that way, if you're cutting along and you slip, that knife's going to be going underneath your finger and avoiding cutting it. Maybe you'll catch the tip of your fingernail a little bit or skin along the side, but compared to like this, if you catch something and you come in, you're going to be taking a nice chunk out of your finger. That's going to be a very bad day for you. So again, fingertips in, and make sure that you keep your thumb well behind where your fingers are for the same reason. It can get very tempting to start to choke up, especially when you're doing dices and whatnot, on, like, say, celery, to try and keep everything together. But if you let that thumb slip out, again, you're going to slide right into that. It's kind of hard to show how that is without getting in the way of the camera, but it's a nice way to cut yourself. Another important thing, and I probably should have mentioned this first, is when you're using a cutting board, always make sure to have some sort of damp rag or paper towel underneath it. So that way, it doesn't slip around. Compared to on the bare wood up here, that's very dangerous, great way to cut yourself up. So make sure to keep something nice underneath it so you're not going to be moving around. Alright, next we're going to be working on the actual maintenance of the knife, namely the sharpening of it right now. So here I've got a classical tri-stone. Now this is a whetstone. You normally have this soaking in the water. I've had this in here for a little while already, and it's called a tri-stone clearly because it has three sides. One coarse, and this is what you're going to be used for building up the angle on the blade and actually taking off any unnecessary steel when you're sharpening. The medium, which is where you're going to actually get the edge on it, and then the fine, which is going to be used to polish up the steel and get any excess nicks or burrs off the end of that from the sharpening process. So there's a few different ways to be sharpening the knife on a stone. For beginners, the one that I suggest is starting all the way at the back of the blade. First important thing is to make sure that you find the angle of the blade itself. So most European chef's knives are between 14 and 17 degrees. And that's depending on the exact knife, the exact maker, small things like that. But generally speaking, a shallower angle is going to be sharper but more brittle, whereas a wider angle, a more obtuse angle, is going to last longer, but it's not going to be as sharp. You're not going to be able to use it for a fine detail. I generally go with a nice 15-degree angle on my blade. I find that's a nice little spot for where I use it. So when you're doing this, you're using long strokes starting from the very back of the knife all the way through to the front. And it's important to be getting as much of this stone in there as possible. Occasionally you see people just going back and forth like this. That's not a good idea, because then you're only using this center part of it, or you're overusing this. And this is going to start getting caved in and almost like a half pipe. And then it's going to be absolutely useless for sharpening, because you're going to, instead of a nice flat angle on that blade, it's going to be convex and bulging out, and that's not what we're looking for. If you are going to be doing something like that, and this is a more advanced way for people who have more experience, is short, quick strokes, but you're still using the whole length of that stone. You don't want to be just using one section or overusing it. And we're going to get a little bit more water on there. Go back on the other side. So again, you're going to be doing it like that. Quick strokes, make sure that you hold that angle on the end. All the way through. I like having a nice little rag here on the side so I can wipe it off in between sharpening. Alright. So now when you're testing the sharpness of your blade, make sure that you never run your finger across the edge of the blade like this. Always go along the side very lightly. And what you're looking for is called the bite. So you want it to just ever so slightly catch your finger. You should feel it just a little bit on the side of the skin. If it's catching too much, it means there's a lot of furs on there, and you're going to need to polish that up. If you're not getting any bite at all, it's dull. So that's something that's going to take some practice to learn, required skill. Alright, that's moving right along. Now this doesn't need too much work on it. I generally keep it nice, but nice to touch it up every once in a while just to keep it pretty. So now we're going down onto the fine side. And this is again, long strokes all the way through for this fine side. You want to be getting a nice, even all the way down that length of the blade. Back onto the other side. the last part of sharpening is the use of a honing steel. Now this isn't actually used for sharpening a knife. This is used between sharpenings to really be able to maintain that edge while you're using it. So while you're using the knife, it's obviously going to be getting little nicks, burrs, and spurs in there. So use the honing steel to knock all that back into place and give you a nice, sharp, continuous edge on your knife. So a lot of times you see in the cooking shows are going like, wow, 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 wow. It's not how you do it. You're going to do more damage to your knife than you're doing good. I like to start off with the honing steel right up in close to your hip, a nice little pocket there, holding it at a good 45 angle from your body, and starting with the blade towards you at the back, you're going to be pulling away. And you're going to be maintaining that same angle on the blade like you do when you're using the sharpening stone. Nice full strokes the whole way down. Now once you've gotten it that way, you're going to So there you have it, basic use and maintenance of your chef's knife. Now, for a quick bit on selection, when you're picking out your first chef's knife, I strongly recommend to go cheap. Again, if you mess up a $20 chef's knife, you drop it on the floor, you accidentally mess up sharpening it, you use it doing the wrong thing and you break it, you're not going to get mad with a $20 chef's knife. You go out and you drop $400 on a high-end professional chef's knife and anything happens to it, you're going to cry. It's not good. I strongly suggest going out and getting either a Walmart special like this guy, or if you're willing to spend a couple of extra dollars and get a professional quality knife that's more than affordable, go on out and pick up a Global. For about $60 you can get a knife very similar to this, full steel, whole way through. They normally have a nice little grip on it though, and it's very affordable. It's a good, perfect knife for beginners. I strongly recommend it when I'm training up new people in a kitchen to go and pick out a Global first. Learn on that, and once you get good with a cheap piece of equipment, when you start moving up to the higher end piece of equipment, you're going to be all that much better with them. So, that's it for knives, selection, care, and maintenance. Again, I'm Richard Spinney. This is the Ghetto Gourmet. Bon appetit.